Welcome to the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry, and today we are at the 2023 Biodynamic Demeter Alliance Conference in Westminster, Colorado, for our national gathering, and have the opportunity to visit in person with Joy and Eric McEwen, the authors of Raising Resilient Bees, Heritage Techniques to Mitigate Mites, Preserve Locally Adapted Genetics, and Grow Your Apiary. And Joy, Eric, it's such a joy to be able to visit with you guys in person, and to be able to share a bit with our audience about your amazing book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. This really is so special. Compliment. Rather than Zoom, to do it in person.
Yeah, it's a nice additional benefit to be able to be together in person.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And we're here at the Biodynamic Conference, right, with so many extraordinary land stewards and healers, farmers, food and medicine growers.
Yeah, visionaries.
Yeah,
teachers all around.
Yeah.
A lot of wisdom in one room.
Yeah. Yeah, such a treat.
I agree.
So I'm really
You're
happy.
Included. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy we get to visit together, and I'll share a bit about your backgrounds, which are really extensive and impressive. And this book is one of the many beautiful publications from our friends at Chelsea Green Publishing. So a huge shout out to Chelsea Green, and we've got a special deal for you that we'll share about a little later. So to get things rolling, Joy, Catherine LeBlanc McEwen, manages Diggin, Livin farm and apiaries, a homestead, organic farm, and commercial beekeeping operation. She holds 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Oregon State University. When she isn't tending hives or farming, she works as an apitherapist with a practice in Southern Oregon and makes a line of jeune beverages called honeybee brews. And we're going to need to talk both about the jeune and the apitherapy, of course.
Very cool.
And Joy is a committee member on the USDA Farm Service Agency Board for Josephine and Jackson counties in Oregon, and also serves as a board member on the Illinois Valley Watershed Council, and is a board member for the American Apitherapy Society. So absolutely beautiful. Eric McEwen heads the beekeeping operation for Diggin, Livin farm and apiaries. That's so fun to say. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Botany and Plant Pathology from Oregon State University, has spent the last 20 years experimenting with the development of organic management practices while tending approximately 700 honeybee colonies. Wow, that's a lot. A former mentor for the Oregon State University Master Beekeeper Program, Eric has served as the Southern Oregon representative on the Oregon State Beekeepers Association Administrative Board, and is a member of the Adaptive Bee Breeders Alliance, a SARE-funded consortium of honeybee professionals and academics collaborating on stock improvement-focused breeding efforts. He is the originator and manufacturer of natural nest beehives and improved style of 8-frame Lamstroth equipment for organic beekeeping. Eric is also a trained botanist and naturalist who loves the wild side of the great outdoors, and I want to ask you about that as well. So we've got a lot to talk about, of course, in the book, which I gotta say is so beautiful with the many amazing photos, many of which are in Oregon, I take it.
Yes.
And is chock full of really practical information for beekeeping. And let's kind of dive right into it, and let me ask you guys,
Love it.
why beekeeping, and what drew you to beekeeping, and why has beekeeping become such a central focus of your stewardship work, your land management work, your food and medicine work? Why bees?
Well,
Why bees?
I mean, why bees? Anyone who's just experienced the presence of bees when you are in their company, when you are immersed in their frequency, their vibrational energy, it's nothing short of mesmerizing, you know. So I had the pleasure. Honestly, we were talking earlier in another person's talk on beekeeping today about just those fleeting moments in your life that can be just this ephemeral moment, but that it gets inside you and changes you forever, you know. And honestly, in that moment today, in that discussion, the moment that popped into my mind was this first time that I ever had the opportunity to open the inside, or to be present for the opening of a hive. And at that time, it wasn't my hives. I was 21, I think, maybe, living in Eugene, Oregon, and I went to a talk by some community beekeepers who had hives at a local community garden, and they were just giving kind of this run-of-the-mill talk of the fundamentals of beekeeping, but I stuck around after the talk, and they could just sort of, my inquisitiveness was palpable, and so they threw me in a suit and they brought me over to their couple hives they had there and opened them up for me. And I can just still remember that day like yesterday. And it was, you know, at the end of that additional half hour or so of getting to look at these bees with those beekeepers, it was just clear to me. I was like, I'm going to do this someday, you know, and that someday was, you know, another 6 or 7 years later or something, you know, but it had that impression on me, and what it was exactly, I don't really know. I think it was the mystery, you know, the intrigue and the mystery of getting to watch this highly organized society, you know, operating in all of its intricacies just right before your eyes, just moving about. I mean, I was enthralled. So, and then, you know, I think like so many beekeepers, you start with one hive, and it's like it grows like an addiction. I don't know that, you know,
a healthy one.
There's been times where maybe it didn't even feel healthy, or maybe it was even out of balance. But the fact is, there was no turning back. You know, it was just the way it was going to go. So, how about you?
I think mine feels pretty different in that what initially led me into bees, I would say I had a yearning to be a production organic farmer. So there was this practicality aspect for me, that we moved down from the Willamette Valley of Oregon into that we found a wonderful piece of land over in Southern Oregon, and it was affordable, and it was on the river, but it was also forested beautiful. But it didn't look like an organic vegetable farm. So that is one part about beekeeping, is that we were able to bring, it was initially bringing our 20 hives down from Corvallis and then multiply, and then being able to have a smaller footprint and have the accessibility of clean air, clean water, and abundant forage in this wild forest that really made it that this was the way I was going to become that professional agriculturalist. So I think mine was a little bit more practical. We're opposite. Usually I'm a little bit more ethereal and he's more practical. But that's okay.
So there's a balance.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, and I got to ask Joy. So, apitherapy. How do you pronounce it?
You got it.
Wow.
There you go.
I maybe had an inkling that this was a thing, but this is a real thing, huh?
Oh, it's definitely a real thing for like thousands and thousands of years, and it's practiced all over the world. So actually, Eric and I, we just came back from a conference called Apimondia. It was, this year, it was in Chile and Santiago, and every other year it switches spots around the world. And there's 6 major focuses of this conference. So this is gathering some of like the biggest and best just bee thinkers of the world. So for apitherapy to be one of 6 of the main topics.
Oh wow.
Okay, so one of the 6 main topics, Eric and I actually spoke on the topic of rural development, but it was really interesting to just see all of these professionals in the field of apitherapy gathering to talk about their practices. So generally, it is using all the products of the hive as medicine. And then I initially got my start about 10 years ago. In 2013, the American Apiary Society had a conference in Portland, and I attended that conference. And even at the time, most of the speakers and a lot of the members of the board were doctors, and they just kept presenting this like incredible story and hearing all sorts of various just attributes of just not just bee venom therapy, but honey and all the products of the hive. And at the same time, what compelled me into this, what felt so cool about this program and the conference at the time, was that there were so many doctors there, and they wanted to share all of this research. Mm-hmm. And they wanted more and more people to learn about it and practice it. But here they were, American doctors, and they're like, our hands are tied. Like, please, beekeepers especially, please get this information out to the people you interact with. And part of that is that this is so many people are practicing this around the world. Mm-hmm. So I think the US is just a little bit behind. Mm-hmm. But currently I am now a board member for that American Apiary Society.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And you know, we had on a past episode our friend Courtney Cosgriff, who's a beekeeper and doing all kinds of work with food and medicine with the honeybees. And she was talking a fair bit about some of the ancient esoteric mystery schools and the connection with the bees, the beehives, the bee medicine, the vibrational frequencies. I mean, this thing is so, it really is a holistic milieu, isn't it, for our human well-being and our direct connection with nature, with our agricultural communities and organisms, farm organisms. There's like a node here that I think is so potent and probably in the mainstream of the American culture is a bit invisible for a lot of us, right? And it's so central, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it is we're just going back into all that, just the great remembering.
Ah, yeah.
You know?
I like that. Yeah. I mean,
And
certainly our historical cultures, placed these mysteries, these schools, this magic at the center of society, right? I mean, certainly, like we can turn to Egypt or Central Europe or
tens of thousands
Great
of
Britain.
years, if not 100,000 of years.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Where the mystery of the bee and the potency of the bee magic was revered at the center of culture. It was it occupied the sphere that everyone was well aware of, and turned to and relied upon. Counted upon.
And just thank goodness that's finally, I mean, there's so many just like the simple ones, which is just like healing open wounds with honey. I mean, come on, it's like hydrophilic, hydrophobic, it produces hydrogen peroxide. They're now finally just like even during surgeries where they're like, okay, we don't need wound dressing, we don't need antibiotics in this, like, let's just use honey. And the way it profoundly is just like surpassing any type of traditional medicine. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, it's like a super disinfectant, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's humectant qualities like minimize scar tissue, prevent infections. It allows like a moist environment for skin tissue to heal from the inside out. And, the best burn labs in the world are using this, cure of antiquity.
So this really kind of goes into like now kind of the push of the book. Like part of us and who we are is that we're really interested in being food producers and specifically honey producers. We're big believers in honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love honey, and I have a number of
we can be friends now.
Beekeeping friends, and I've actually kept bees a little bit myself.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Just a little.
Great.
Great.
In this book is so beautiful, and I'll show it again for our audience that are looking at the video version here. Raising Resilient Bees. And in here, you've got just lovely photos, lots of hands-on moments that are documented in the photography of it. And in the text, of course, you're covering a number of key items and issues in the course of the 7 chapters. And this first chapter, A New Apiary for a New Age, I was hoping you could tell us a bit about, what's that all about? What do you mean by a new apiary for a new age?
Well, I mean, I think like most people are aware that the bees are under pressure. It might be safe to say like we're experiencing a crisis in beekeeping and a crisis in the environment that bees require for their health and their well-being. And that has really occurred in a relatively short period of time. Mirroring industrialization and modern agricultural practices, and how fast they swept the land base, right? Like the vast majority of the area that humans are interacting with and modifying the climate of is now under the sway of these new modern techniques. And the bees, they just went along, they got swept along, and now here we are. We inadvertently developed our food systems in these new ways so rapidly that the bee is the consequences for the bee came about, are still being felt. Like we're now, the fruit is now being harvested from the seeds that we sowed in modern industrial agriculture, and they're being reaped in the world, in the genre of the bee. And so, what the new apiary for a new age is really about is that we are having this existential crisis. So that word gets used so much these days, but for the bees, like the bees are on the brink, right? So we need to make a change, and we need to make a change rapidly. So it's important that we start articulating that vision now and start, saying like, what are the components and implementation of those components? What are the things that need to change now? Like, because we don't have another several generations that we took to create the problem to solve the problem, right? We've got to solve this problem in a couple decades or less. We've got to turn this around. So that's what this is about. Is that the way what Joy and I visualize ourselves as is a bridge. We visualize ourselves as a bridge between the past and the future, between conventional and sustainable, from conventional to regenerative, and these changes that need to occur, we can't just snap our fingers and start doing things differently. We've got food systems that depend on bees. We have people and livelihoods and nutrition that feeds a whole populace that's dependent upon these existing systems that we have. So despite the fact that these existing systems are so messed up, so unsustainable, so much like guaranteeing our demise, we can't just turn them on their head. Like, we've got to talk about the transition phase. And that's, I think, what we envision ourselves as. Like in the new age, the new age that we espouse in our book, operations like the operation that we run might not even really need to exist. But the reality is that we're absolutely needed right now, like as the bridge, as the integral transition phase from this completely destructive system that dominates our food production to where we need to go, which is local, sustainable, earth-friendly, non-toxic. That's where we need to get to. But of course, it's gonna take a creating an architecture to get there that we don't have right now.
I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, please, of course.
New apiary for a new age. I think the other part of that is that it really involves community. Like, we all used to be in agriculture together, like agriculture, like the brewing, the revitalization, the revival, the grouping. It involved people. And like, I don't know, there's a lot of times where farming has felt really lonely.
Yes.
And as a mother, sometimes I think about the mothers, the families out in the Midwest, and I picture them in this farmhouse, and the mom just being like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go get a teaching job in the city because I'm so lonely.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what's happening in agriculture as well. That a new apiary for a new age is that it involves togetherness, where we remember, part of that great remembering, that when our neighbor doesn't do well in farming, we all feel it. Remember? We all remember. And I guess that's part of where we need to come together as well, is just be thinking about how to have a system that involves the interconnectivity of all of us people and being a village again together.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And what comes to mind for me is that the beehive itself is literally and symbolically that village, that community, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, the hive being.
They are our teachers in this way. Yeah.
So beautiful. I want to dive a little more deeply into the existential crisis that honeybees are experiencing. There's this term colony collapse disorder that I think a lot of our audience will be familiar with.
I think so.
And I'm curious, what do you see as the leading specific factors that is underlying this detrimental phenomenon we're seeing at such drastic scales now?
That's a great question. I think the term colony collapse disorder, while at one point there was a set of specific characteristics associated with it, I think really what's important about that notion of colony collapse disorder is that it's indicative of a series of a suite of factors that are affecting the honeybee today. So there's several key factors that are contributing together to this malady that the bees are suffering. Mm-hmm. Certainly, one of them is the parasitism of honeybees by the varroa mite, which originated in Asia. It was originally a parasite of a different species of honeybee. Due to human activity and overlap of these honeybee species, it jumped ship and made a host shift to Apis mellifera, the western honeybee, which is the species of honeybee that's essentially kept by people around the world. When the varroa mite made this host shift, it also changed its reproductive biology to infecting the larva, the brood of the worker bees, and thus destabilize the ability for a colony to reproduce safely. So that's definitely a component. And how the varroa mite affects the vitality, the health of a colony is complicated. And clearly one way that they do so is by vectoring viruses. So we've seen this total upending of viral evolutionary biology where the natural tendency of a virus is to evolve towards being benign. The longer I can live in my host, the farther my host is going to spread me. And so most viruses tend to evolve towards being benign, perhaps even having no symptomology at all, right? But the relationship of honeybee colonies from one to another, and the fact that one will opportunistically feed on the resources of a failing colony means that when a colony is collapsing from varroa mite infestation, that you then have this rapid transfer of the mites to other neighboring colonies. Wow. So all of a sudden you have a horizontal transmission of viruses instead of a vertical transmission from parent to child, and that creates this new evolutionary pressure towards virility, towards being more and more lethal. So that's what we've seen viruses that were thought of as inconsequential that are now killing colonies. Those are certainly components of this crisis for bees, but at the core of it all is another whole phenomena, which is toxicity and lack of habitat, lack of forage. So when do we see these symptoms of CCD, or when do we see these regionally unsustainable losses mushrooming up? It's when climate change or weather comes in and creates a situation where you have whole regions where the bees are lacking insufficient forage. Or, for instance, in the heartland, where bees are trying to exist in these seas of monoculture that are just being bathed in chemicals that we know are bad for insects.
And all life.
And all life.
Yeah.
And so, you're weakening the immune system of the bees. You're by, reducing their ability to access healthy food. You're weakening their immune system by bathing them in chemicals. And then you have, unsustainable parasite loads and extremely virile viruses. And they are like this cocktail that comes together and creates these huge regional rates of losses. And it's kind of like moving around the globe at any particular time. But like, for instance, last year, Oregon and Washington, near where we keep bees, had loss rates well above the national average. And these are regions that are maybe not as intensively farmed as other parts of the country, and regions that tend to have more pristine environments, and yet it's still a complex problem. So, but that, I think, those are kind of the main key factors.
Yeah. Let me ask, in one of the talks I attended earlier today, we had a discussion around the effects of electromagnetic frequency pollution as well, coming from our wireless and cellular communication, our satellite internet connectivity. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this topic. I'm curious if you're seeing that as contributing as well.
Well, we have 3 daughters, 12, 15, and 19. Yeah. And just the way that it's just so addictive for all of us humans. There's just so many different factors going on where, of course, it's just thinking about these small little insects, these honeybees.
Yeah.
If it's affecting us at this large of a level, how is it affecting these honeybees? I don't know. Do you know, any specifics? But you can just see by scale.
Yeah. I love, we're sort of here in situ in the middle of the conference, and as people are walking by, there's this energy and this excitement, this exuberance.
They must have felt that. They heard the EMF and they're like,
I hope the audio's okay for everybody as we're having these, parties of amazing people walking by. But yeah, this convergence of all these different factors obviously is having such a profound effect on the bees. And to a point you were making earlier, Eric, it's not an exaggeration to say that a huge portion of the food that we're dependent on is pollinated by the bees, right? That's
not an exaggeration. So if you're hoping to eat something more than porridge or gruel, then you should be cherishing the bee, because dairy industry, for instance, not a lot of people think about milk, but alfalfa is the pollinated crop. If alfalfa seed isn't getting produced, then alfalfa isn't getting grown, then cows aren't being fed alfalfa, then the dairy industry goes south. So their influence is far-reaching. I think the statistic today is that they're responsible for $16 billion worth of agricultural productivity in the United States annually.
Yeah.
Well, and then not only that, it's just how dependent the deer are on pollination. The birds are on pollination. The bears are on pollination.
The entire ecology.
And then what Eric and I, we tend to like to talk about quite a bit is just how honeybees really increase the carrying capacity of the land. And that in itself is the honeybees are profoundly increasing just the productivity of any kind of farmscape, landscape.
Especially degraded landscapes,
especially degraded landscapes
are turning it around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a huge regenerative
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for
That's
I mean,
exactly
their
right.
poop, their poop is like probiotic, like vitamins being spread all across the landscape, plus just their dead bodies as well. But they are contributing so much in the form of like, I mean, we've had a couple different bee yards where we have one in particular that we used to call Mars. It was just like this rocky ground.
Wow.
And then you put honeybees on the landscape, and we're growing like, I mean, soil, grasses, flowers. I mean, and so you can see that this isn't just beneficial to the honeybees. I mean, this is beneficial to all of the beings around it.
Well, as a talking point, like social insects, aka ants, bees, wasps, and termites, account for like 80% of the insect biomass on the planet, or maybe it's even like animal biomass. I don't, but they're foundational to the primary productivity of the land. And it was actually just this morning, Alex from Spikenard Farm in his discussion, he was talking about how when you bring bees onto a land, just their dead exoskeletons can increase ant productivity by like 40% on a site, you know? So we don't even have the awareness to understand how much that affects the productivity of the land. If you can increase the productivity of ants by 40% with the presence of one species in an area, that's foundational. Like, you know, we are almost inconsequential as a species compared to that.
It's one of our favorite parts about being beekeepers, and just being humans, is like, what is our net growth of soil we've accumulated in our lifetime? Like, you know, like, what have you done? How much soil have you brought back to the earth? You know, honeybees are responsible for lots of it.
So literally, we can think about the honeybees and the hives as spreaders of fertility.
Yes. Completely.
Not just the pollination, but literally the fertility of the soil.
Probiotics.
And Joy was mentioning, their feces actually have lacto and bifidus bacteria in them. So, like, they're actually seeding their environment with probiotics.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's tremendous.
We love it. Like, sometimes we'll have a pallet of hives and you move them, and you can just see the grass all around, like, building up. No,
we literally move colonies into places that we're trying to improve the soil, you know, and produce more soil on ground that's lost its topsoil for whatever reason, mining or production in ag or whatever. We'll bring bees into these sites, and it's like a jump start. I mean, of course you can see it in the little ring right around where the bees were, where how all of a sudden the grass grows 6 inches tall and is dark green, and flowers start popping up. But then you start realizing that our awareness just isn't quite capable of seeing it on the landscape, but it's happening on the landscape. We have the pleasure of stewarding a piece of land that was hydraulic mined in the turn of the 20th century. And when we inherited the stewardship of this land, it was still devoid of vegetation 100 years after this destructive practice had occurred. And now we're just so ecstatic to tell people about how the honeybees, the presence of honeybees and the intensive use of honeybees on this property has just jump-started the regenerative process. We now have thick grass growing along sides of the roads. All this ground that was devoid of vegetation has now got plants growing on it. And I mean, imagine the carbon fixation that's occurring there, and it's really exciting.
We did a lot of deep listening on that land too. When we first got it, it had gone through a lot of hardship, and so we kind of just had to tell it right from the get-go, like, we're not here to hurt you. Like, we're not going to cut your trees. We're just going to listen. And now we're really in this wonderful symbiotic relationship. Yeah,
I was just going to say this key word came up earlier today, relationship, and the reciprocity, the respect, the reverence. It seems that you guys are embodying this, and you're doing this on this land that you're stewarding in such a beautiful way.
Thanks.
And helping others do it too.
And so you have 3 teenage daughters. Are they all teenage?
We have
12,
3 teenagers.
15, and 18,
And so are they pretty engaged in this work that you're doing?
Well, part of it is it's been their whole life. You know? So if it's not even just they've been around bees when they were really little. They used to just stick their hands in honey, and kind of like walk around the farm to try to have the bees land on them. And then they just, you kind of pet them and talk to them.
Yeah.
So, and then they've always just, it's been their way of life. So.
Maybe, spent more time than they would have cared to in the back of a bee truck, but
It was pretty, well, Fern, the oldest, she loves to talk about the smell of the bee truck.
Yeah.
I had in my notes to ask you about this, because I remember when I was keeping a hive, the aroma is so, it's like a spa, right? It's like aromatherapy.
It is.
It is.
All the volatile oils, especially just opening up the hive. It has all sorts of effects just on your nervous system, and then chronic respiratory illnesses. To be able to smell just the propolis, it's all just alive.
And it's like bioregional aromatherapy, it's like place-based aromatherapy where
there you go.
you're actually reacquainting your own senses, your own nervous system with the plant substances of your own space, your own home.
Yeah.
I think it's like a deepening of your body's connection to the land when you breathe that air. Yeah.
It's old. It's just an old feeling. Sure.
Yeah. I love it. I'm wondering, so you guys clearly are doing so much in the way of the direct stewardship, and one of the chapters, by the way, that I want to ask about has to do with managing the mite issue. I'm curious too, you're seeing this therapeutic benefit for people broadly. You're thinking and cultivating community and connection among and between people and land stewards. I'm wondering if you were to envision, in the near term, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, if we could wave our magic wand and see a very different relationship in general among the population in general and bees in particular, what would that look like? What do you think we can see happen?
I don't know. I love it. I want to just soak that up.
I think for starters, I hold space in my heart for a steady, something that we can really wrap our minds around, like a steady change, an incremental change in agricultural practices. I think is just at the heart of it all. I think a bunch of chemicals need to be banned in our country, and we could lead the way for the world, in just eliminating the use of these toxic chemicals. And I know that scares farmers because they see these chemicals as sometimes their only tools to affordably produce their products. But I think we as a society need to combat that mindset. We need to let our farmers know that we have their back, that we will absorb and accept a rising cost of production that will accompany removing these tools from their tool belt, because that we just have to do that, for all of our sake, for the waterways, for the insects in the waterways, for the soil, for the earthworms that are having having nervous system dysfunction from the chemicals in the soil. This certainly goes beyond bees, but bees are the veritable canary or what have you, and the bees are telling us you got to change your ways. So I think number one is we got to get rid of chemical agriculture.
Yep.
And then we need to see a greater proportion of our land base returned to natural systems. As a permaculturalist, I've seen mathematics that suggest that we could support a population on the globe of 10 billion with 20% of the land base. That 80% of the land base could be returned back to natural systems. Now, Would that require us to make massive changes in our lifestyle and our standard of living? You bet. Maybe we're not going to get there tomorrow. Maybe those austerity measures aren't going to ever be implemented. But do we need to start going in that direction? Do we need to start valuing those, the inherent, we need to value the quality of natural systems and what they bring to us economically. We take all these economic inputs for granted, but the reality is they're not fixed. They take maintenance by nature.
I want to kind of lean into one of the things you're saying here and push a little. And Joy, I really want to hear from you on my previous question.
Waving the magic wand. I'm God, really?
Wave it, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, let me just say this. This notion of the austerity, I wonder if the transformations we envision might not result in much higher quality of life anyhow. And we might be thinking right now that, oh wow, these are austerity measures, we're going to be giving so much up. But one of the things I really wonder, especially with modern industrial culture and society, is how much we're giving up right now.
I agree.
And my sense is that our sense of joy, our sense of humanness, our sense of community, connection, health and wellness, mental health, immune system health, all of that might actually improve as a result of these steps that we'll probably be taking one way or another.
Go ahead. Really quick. I'm just going to say super quick. As a response to that, the agricultural sector is responsible for the use of a lion's share of the resources, right? And yet, how much food goes to waste, right? Just as a feedback to what you're saying, if we could ever just improve efficiency here, people, we might not have to change our lifestyle at all. If we just improve efficiency, we just need to apply. I mean, I'm not a technologist, but let's be real, we certainly could improve the way we do things on this planet and improve the cost of productivity so much. What were you going to say?
Okay, magic wand.
I guess part of it for me, it's a little bit scary to say, but part of the magic wand is for us to respect and deliver of what it means to have a strong local food economy, And so what does that mean? Am I wishing that the I-5 is going to close? Am I wishing? I'm not. But I am saying at least for us to be doing some tests for actually how strong we are, how strong is a local economy? It's how many times a dollar gets used in a system without leaving the system, right? And so right now, Amazon just increased their profit, third quarter last year was $2 billion. Third quarter this year was $9 billion. They're sucking money out of the local economies. So if I were to wave my magic wand, it is about local producers and respecting how do we create that strong local economy and have more local producers? What is it that we actually need? And what is it that is not just this idea of convenience that comes down the I-5? I get kind of frustrated when there's 50 different types of yogurt. I'm just look at this idea of convenience. It's packaging, distribution, a truck to another truck, to a train to the truck, to the plastic to the truck, all in this idea of 50 different types of yogurt. And I think the other word for this idea of convenience is actually carelessness.
Interesting.
Do we actually, is this a mask? Because all we really should want here is that one super dank type of goat yogurt with the honey really and it's OG and everything about it. And so sometimes if I were to wave that magic wand, it just has a lot to, I just think we'll be so much stronger. We'll be so much stronger if we could just cut out this idea of needing all these types of conveniences.
And maybe somehow raising consumer awareness about what is quality, what is of value here. People are subject to, it's been proven advertising works, and so all of this money is spent to beguile people into into desiring things that aren't good for them and aren't good for the environment. And if people could just raise their awareness, raise their consciousness, you know, I eat really well. I eat such good food for my body. And you know what? I don't spend much money on doing it. I just eat a really simple diet. And I'm not asking everyone to eat the way I eat, but become aware of what you're voting for when you buy a box of Cheerios because they're affordable. Like maybe
glyphosate.
Yeah,
so much chemicals.
You could have spent that same amount of money on whatever whole rolled oats that didn't come in a package. And you know, like, I just wish that people could spend a little more time educating themselves on because it really does come down to people voting with their dollar. That's how we're going to change our society. But the fact is, you know, corporations, what have you, the social economic structure that we live in have essentially eliminated our middle class, squeezed us all down to the point where people are desperate, barely have enough money to subsist on, and so they're making these survival-based choices. But I think, unfortunately, they don't realize that they're making decisions that are not in their own best interest. And how could we bring that back around? Through a local economy, through awareness, and you know, and a level playing field, right? Like a government that actually supports sustainability and government that supports local economies instead of subsidizing corporate ag. Like, you know, the federal subsidization of corporate agriculture is a major criminal activity that we are all paying for with our tax dollars, and it's deepening the problem. The reason why Amazon and Home Depot and all these corporations are crushing it right now is because our government is implementing policies that favor large corporations over small entrepreneurs, even though small entrepreneurs formed the majority of our economy, certainly until COVID. So I think we need to look at changing that back to that, or increasing that.
Well said.
Were you going to add to that, Joy?
No, well said. That was great. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's so much to consider in all of this, from the ecology to the health and wellness to the economy. I love it. I absolutely love it. Let me ask, I want to get to the mites, just this chapter that
important.
You put together specifically for tools and techniques to help manage the situation with the mites. Can you tell us about this?
Well, maybe we could start with just a little bit of a summary of natural nest beekeeping.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yes.
Sure.
Because one of the tenets would be about...
Just as a little background, I mean, mites are, you know, public enemy number one in beekeeping. I mean, close second would be agrochemicals, in my opinion, and habitat loss. So, habitat loss, you know, is maybe the first thing that caused a decline in productivity of honeybees around the world. Agrochemicals, maybe the second thing, and then varroa mites and their potency has become maybe the premier problem of beekeeping around the world. So prior to the varroa mite, beekeepers around the world were probably the most staunch adversary of chemical agriculture in any agricultural sector. Beekeepers were always adversary. So beekeepers were, you know, the most outspoken people against chemical ag because they were the first ones to feel the effects of chemical ag. Bees and chemicals don't mix. So beekeepers have always been organic. Beekeepers have always been alternative to some extent. But when the varroa mite threatened to bring the entire industry down, beekeepers were desperate. And they were literally watching their enterprise just sift right through their hands. And so probably against their better judgment, but out of lack of options, they turned to the chemical industry, and the chemical industry delivered. You know, chemical, it's hard to kill a bug on a bug, you know, and dosage and everything, that's the kind of thing a chemist loves, right? So they're gonna figure that out for you. And the reality is they did. They figured out chemicals that could kill mites without killing the bees, and they saved the beekeeping industry to some extent, and the beekeepers became an unwilling spokesperson for the chemical industry, and and it was a really sad marriage, but that's the state of things, right? So that's what happened, and everyone hoped, we're about 40 years into this, and everybody hoped that the varroa mite and the parasitic relationship of the varroa mite was going to slowly evolve towards being more benign. That over time, maybe the bees would develop their own mechanisms to deal with the varroa, and the varroa maybe would become less lethal or something. And unfortunately, that just doesn't really seem to have been the case. While there are a few instances where varroa populations around the world are developing mechanisms of survival, they don't translate very well when it comes into beekeeping under human care or a lack of geographic isolation. So anyway, that's the background story. And the reality is, we have to break that. We have to develop new methods, new technologies to use substances that aren't toxic, substances that aren't just allowing our food to be poisoned while simultaneously helping the varroa mite build up resistance to a certain chemical, and then we have to use a harsher chemical, and then the varroa mite builds up a resistance to this kind. That's like the treadmill that most conventional beekeepers are on right now. Their chemical tools are failing them. So right now we're at a place where the beekeeping industry actually, ironically, is turning to these organic methods, because organic methods utilizing substances that are have a different mode of action instead of some very specific biochemical interruption or something. They're not substances that are that easy for an organism to develop resistance to. For instance, if I pour acid on you, it's going to take a lot of generations for you to evolve a thicker skin, right? It's probably not going to happen. So the reality is these organic methods that are non-toxic, not harmful to our food supply, are actually being employed more and more right now. So that's the good news, is that more and more people are realizing their chemical fixes aren't working, and they're actually looking at other tools and tricks and methods that can interrupt the varroa's ability to breed effectively inside the colony. So our chapter on varroa mites is really about integrated pest management. It's about trying to not overly rely on a substance, but also explore the ways in which we can employ manual manipulations of the colony, including such things as a breaking up of the brood cycle, to eliminate the varroa mite's ability to reproduce constantly in the colony, or to have this constant increase of varroa mite populations inside the hive. If we can create little interruptions in their growth curve, then we can kind of bring them back down to baseline and create a situation where the varroa mite maybe is always present in the hive, but they're not reaching these lethal levels. So,
great.
And part of that is by understanding the mite lifestyle cycle, and then also integrating into that, what we do is natural queen rearing. So,
And Joy, is this the natural nest beekeeping? Tell us, what is that?
Yes.
What is that?
Our natural nest beekeeping is something that we have kind of just developed over these years as really being a myriad of different techniques. It's kind of a combination of a lot of different things that we do. So when we say natural nest beekeeping, what we're doing is it's our way that we've been beekeeping, and we're looking at, first we look at kind of the hive itself. So the hive itself, and making sure that it's made of suitable, sustainable materials. And this is just so for us that is wood and wax, but it's also wood that is sustainably produced or harvested. What Eric and I really enjoy is we enjoy knowing the wood. We enjoy knowing where the wood comes from and the farms that it comes from, and we enjoy the beautiful patterns it makes and the aliveness of the wood itself. We enjoy that it's from where we live. It's not from clear-cut pines, so that's a big part of it too. Pines in particular are just a pine wood, especially waterlogged over the winter. It's just heavy, and the bees do cold pretty well, but they don't do wet. They don't do humidity. And we have, daughters, and they're just and instead for us to be able to work with cedar and redwood, and from farmers and farms that we know,
Standing deadwood.
Standing deadwood or
Yeah,
even
yeah.
savage wood. And then also that it's closed cells. So in that case, it has an R value. It's not so
Yeah.
heavy.
For insulation,
Yeah.
R value.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's
Dry
kind of a
and
big
warm.
part of it. So one is looking at the hive itself. Another would be just our using organic and biodynamic methods.
Yeah.
Another would be that a natural queen rearing that we really appreciate. Well, we surrender to the mystery of life, of not knowing. We enjoy being able to say that we don't know which is the best egg, which is the best queen out of this frame. We appreciate that the bees obviously are the ones who know the best.
Yeah, we defer to the wisdom of the hive.
Yeah. And the lineage of the hive in that respect as well.
Yeah, the maintenance of the lineage of the hive.
Love that.
And then,
Keep going.
I was just going to say...
We got a couple more points.
Right there in the natural queen rearing, there's just sort of this... there's something that's kind of cool, which is that if you raise a queen without employing... So, the main method for queen rearing and dissemination of queens to the industry is using a technique called grafting. One of the upsides of grafting is that the product of grafting is as a capped cell inside of which is a pupated queen that you are then inserting into a queenless colony, and it emerges into that colony within a couple days of being placed there, and it's a very rapid means of starting a new colony. So we don't employ that technique. The upside of not employing that technique is that the process that we use for rearing queens is actually much slower. And the upside of that is that from the period of time that we create a queenless colony to that period of time when that colony has a new queen in it that's laying is essentially a full month. It's about 30 days. And in that 30 days, a really awesome thing happens, which is that all the brood in the colony emerges, and there is no brood any longer in the colony prior to the new queen laying her first egg. And that is a very simple thing that is a break in the brood cycle. The varroa mite requires brood to reinfest, and they have a very limited period of time that they can move around in the colony before they need to go and reinfest a new larva to infect and feed on. And so if there are none, then it results in a lot of the fertile mites, the mature mother mites, being essentially flushed from the colony.
Wow. Okay.
So this simple thing of going back to sort of the old way of raising queens had this inadvertent advantage that the mites don't actually thrive under that management practice. So that's at the backbone of how we take care of our bees and how we manage our mite populations.
Absolutely
Kind of
beautiful.
both together. Yep.
Absolutely beautiful. Let me remind our audience, this is the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry. Today we're visiting with Joy and Eric McEwen, the authors of Raising Resilient Bees. And you can probably tell by the background noise that we're in the middle of a very festive and joyous Biodynamic National Conference here in Colorado, Westminster, Colorado, 2023, hosted by the Biodynamic Demeter Alliance. I want to give a couple shout outs, especially to Sheila Foster. We recently did a podcast with her. She's the executive director of the Biodynamic Demeter Alliance, of course. Our friends Brooke Livin and Stephanie Sizan have both been on the podcast, and they're here. They gave a talk earlier today. Friend Courtney Cosgriff mentioned her. Also, Scott Black from the Xerces Society, looking a lot at this chemical impact on invertebrate insect populations broadly. That's a really important episode. Want to be sure to give a huge shout out to Chelsea Green Publishing, and of course, again, Raising Resilient Bees is a Chelsea Green publication. And if you're interested, you can get a 35% discount on all the Chelsea Green publications using the code YOE35. So a huge shout out to Chelsea Green. We also want to thank Purium Organic Superfoods, Waylay Waters, Biodynamic Hemp Infused Aromatherapy Soaking Salts. We will have these tomorrow at the showcase. Profitable Purpose Consulting, helping companies get bee certified. Earth Hero Sustainable Products. Soil Works Biodynamic Garden Preparation.
Cool.
Earth Coast Productions. And of course, our many ambassadors and our growing global ambassador network. We want to give a special thanks to everybody who gives monthly to the Y on Earth community. And if you haven't yet signed up for our monthly giving program and you'd like to, you can go to yonearth.org, just click on the donate button, select any amount that works great for you. If you'd like to do the $33 or greater amount per month, as a thank you gift, we'll send you a jar or more than one, depending on your giving level, of the Waylay Waters soaking salts as a thanks. That's in the United States that we can do that. And we've got a beautiful opportunity after our main podcast to have a little behind the scenes chat that gets published for our ambassadors in our ambassador resources section of the platform. So we'll transition to that in a moment. But perhaps just to kind of wrap things up here with the main episode today, I want to ask, how does biodynamics play into your beekeeping specifically and your farming and land stewardship generally? Can you paint a picture for maybe some of our audience members who might not be as familiar?
Why don't you start?
That's a great question. Well, for starters, bees derive their nutrition from the land.
Yeah.
So when we engage in spiritually scientific practices of revitalizing the land, we are playing a part in revitalizing the land for the bees, right? Yeah. And as we engage in these practices in agricultural settings, we're creating superior forage for the bees. But furthermore, it was really Rudolf Steiner's lectures on the bees that had a profound influence on our practices. And a number of the practices that we utilize in managing our colonies are derived from Demeter's standards. So early on in our beekeeping, we found Demeter's standards and realized that they resonated with us, that we shared those as common values. And so before we really even knew much about our interest in aligning with Demeter or what have you, it was clear that these requirements made sense. They just, and specifically a foundationless brood nest and queens reared without the practice of grafting. Those were,
and an uninterrupted comb.
Yeah, an uninterrupted, naturally constructed brood nest. And queens reared in a natural fashion by the bees themselves. And, just right there, you're just like, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. So they were the only organization that called out those other conventions for what they were, and organics hasn't addressed them. No one's addressed them. And yet, Rudolf Steiner called out the practice of grafting as potentially destructive to the honeybees 100 years ago. Yeah. And so clearly his vision was right on the money, and Demeter upholding his vision through holding these as standards for beekeeping made it clear that this was the only organization that really aligned with our own personal integrity as beekeepers.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And then I think another part of what biodynamics is, it really is this whole system approach. And so in beekeeping, when you're like, okay, I want to start beekeeping and get a hive, it's like, is it really about buying it, calling up someone and being like, most of the pine bee boxes you get are from clear cuts. I mean, or you're going to order this, or you're going to order that. Instead, plastic. I think and plastics. And so instead, the type of beekeeping that we wanted to do was the whole system approach and know all the components of it. And then I also just think on a personal level too, which was that like in part of like Waldorf education and just biodynamics in general, it's like it's nurturing the whole tree, not just one branch of the tree.
Yeah.
And that is something that I've always really resonated with.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that metaphor. It's literal and it's figurative.
Just
The whole tree.
want to say really quick that plastics, like we feel like the products of the hive are medicine, right? They are nothing short of medicine, vital for the vitality, for the essence of what it means to be a human. But as organic standards became under the management of the USDA, the whole issue of plastics got completely ignored. So, Demeter are the only ones saying that plastics and honey do not belong together.
Wow.
Like, this is simple foundational stuff, but it's like, as beekeepers with strong opinions on these topics, like, they're the only people to align with, because they're the only people calling out these ridiculous incongruencies in other parts of the industry. So.
And then in the industry itself, just to be noted, there's plastic all over the place, plastic frames, plastic hives, and it really is junk. It is stuff that just goes into landfills.
Right. Not to mention into your food and into your body.
Yeah.
Well, this is absolutely wonderful, and you guys, thank you so much. And I want to be sure to mention that folks can get the books at chelseagreen.com. Again, use the code YOE35 for that discount if you'd like. And you can connect directly with Joy and Eric at digginlivin.com. Of course, we'll have these links in the show notes. And on Facebook, Diggin, Livin Farm and Apiaries, and on Instagram, Diggin, Livin Bees. And you guys, we're going to transition to our behind the scenes segment and conclude our main podcast episode. It's been such a honor, a joy, and a privilege to have this opportunity to visit with you. Thanks so much, and thank you for putting the time and effort into creating such a beautiful and resource-rich book for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I gotta just say thanks to our kids, because we needed to write it down for them, and they got us to actually do it.
Yeah.
To the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Love
you
you all.
guys. Great.
Yeah.
Bye now.
The Y on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit yonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code YONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the yonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Y on Earth community.